Hey, this is Passy from Passy's World of ICT, the guy with the white hat. And today we're going to be having a look at Python programming, how to program in Python. And we're going to have some more of a look at algorithms and pseudocode. We've looked at this previously in a previous lesson, which was about using Visual Basic, the console programming in Visual Basic, to check out and test your algorithms and pseudocode. In this lesson, we're kind of going to do the same thing, but it's going to be in Python. It is kind of important that you've looked through the previous lesson, you've watched the video on algorithms and pseudocode, the Visual Basic version. That will help a lot with this Python version because we're going to go through some of the things really quickly that we've covered before. But anyway, let's stop talking and get started with this. And away we go. All right, design tools. So that's what we're looking at here, algorithms and pseudocode, another look at that. And this time I'm going to do it using Python. So in a previous lesson, we covered all of the 10 conventions for pseudocode. So these are your 10 kind of program structures you can have in the logic of a program when you're designing it and coming up with the algorithm design and writing some pseudocode. So if you haven't watched our previous video, it's probably best to do that because we go through all of these in detail. We're going to assume you know these 10 commandments of pseudocode and we're all good to go with looking at how we can investigate some of them further using Python. All right, now we suggest you get the free Python Room emulator. Okay, you just go to pythonroom.com and click on the Get Started button on that page that you go to. And then you'll get an option here to join with Google, join a classroom, just join up with email. And if you're a student, just use your school email account will do the job. And you just need to put in that email address and come up with a password, and don't forget that password. So maybe just use a password that you've been using already for school or something like that so that you do not forget it. And how we use the emulator is there will be a file icon, a plus that's colored green, and that's for new file. So first you click on new file, and what happens then is you're able to type in the name of the program that you're going to write, and then you press enter to get started. When you press enter, that's going to take you into the Python Room editor, and where we've written in blue there, that's where all the Python code goes in. So you write all your code in this window here. And then when you're ready to run it, you just click that green arrow up the top right-hand corner, and that'll do the Pythoning and run your program for you. Now, you don't have to save the program at all. It keeps saving itself automatically online. And on the tab up here, there's an X. So you just click on that X to close the program. And when you close it, that does a final save anyway. All right, so there's some things you need to know about the syntax of Python. Now, we need to put print brackets quotes, and that's to put some text onto the screen. If you want people to be able to input, you use the input brackets, and then comments start with a hash sign, a pound sign, a sharp sign there. Equals is used for the backwards arrow equivalent in pseudocode to assign a value to something when you're dimensioning it or defining it at the start of your program. And you need to use double equals to when you're checking if something is equal. And the not equals to is an exclamation equals, although I think you can use less than, greater than signs together like we do in Visual Basic. So when we want to get something input as shown here, we've defined a variable and we're using our Hungarian notation. So if you're not sure what that is, go back and watch our video about naming conventions and notation. So we've got str here underscore, so that's a string variable, username entered. So whatever they enter is going to go into memory, into username entered, and to get entry of data from the user, you use equals input brackets and then just give them a message about what you want them to type in. So in Python, this is kind of the equivalent of that Visual Basic read line that we were using when we wrote some console programs. And when you want to put your counter up by 1, like an integer variable here, we've got int counter. which we'd already defined, you can use plus equals 1 rather than saying int counter equals int counter plus 1 if you want to do it quicker. And if you want to set your int counter to 0, it would just be int counter equals 0. So the single 0 sets variables to initial values. But if you want to check them in an if statement, like here we're checking if the string username entered is actually equal to the string username we've got in memory, and the string password they've entered is actually equal to. So we have to use the double equal to. Okay, so that's something you need to get used to in Python that we didn't have to do in Visual Basic. So there's quite a few little quirks and things that are different in Python compared with Visual Basic. And so your input commands are treated as strings unless you add a prefix onto them of int or float, which we'll look at in more detail in a minute. And also the case, the capital letters or small letters, is very important. So if you want something to be input as an integer number, it needs to be little int. A common mistake is you just write capital int and then that won't work in Python properly. Okay, so we use basically int for integers, float for if we want to have decimals put in as well, and Boolean for assigning true false is a little bit different to how we do it in other languages like Visual Basic. Okay, so variables are not declared, so you don't have to use dim statements like you did in Visual Basic. As soon as you type the name of a variable in, Python just defines it, but it defines it as a string variable. So you can see down here we've got str device name equals input. Now, because we're just using a regular input, whatever we type in is going to be stored as a string, just a collection of letters in their ASCII character format. If we want to have an integer value put in, like a number, in front of your input statement, you need to put int. So these blue words in Python rooms are special Python words, okay? So it's nice how it color codes it in Python room for you. You can also like download Python and use their sort of console type editor as well. But Python room is just so quick and easy to use. That's what we've been using for testing out Python code. If you want to have decimals, so how many hours a device is on for, we wanted them to be able to enter something like 2.5 if they wanted to, or 2.25 for 2 hours 15 minutes. So we've just set that as float. So we call it Hungarian float underscore hours of use, but that won't define it as a decimal value in memory. We need to actually put the word float. So in like Visual Basic, we're using double to define when we want to have decimals, or we can use decimal as a word in Visual Basic, but in Python we use the word float if we've got anything that involves decimals in it. Now the Boolean's a little bit different. The way Python likes you to do it is you set like your Boolean that they've paid their fees here to true, but the preferred way of doing the coding is to just say if Boolean fees paid, okay? And then have a message output onto the screen. You can code it like we would in Visual Basic, where you put like if Boolean fees paid. Well, we wouldn't use double equals in Visual Basic, but double equals true, thank you for paying your fees. So it's kind of a bit like English. The first way is the preferred way. It's just like, hey, you paid your fees, and they tell you, and it's yes or no is the situation. This is, the second version here is kind of like saying to someone, is it actually true that your fees are paid up at the moment? And it's the same with when we're checking for false. So when we're checking for false, we just say if not. We code it as if not. So if not Boolean fees paid. So if it's not in a situation where they've paid their fees, well then let's ask them to pay their fees. So that's the preferred coding rather than if Boolean fees paid double equals false. Look, they will both work, and we'll jump across to our Python room and actually show that to you. Where is my Python room? Just here. Okay, so we've got one somewhere here called Boolean. So this is one we've written previously, has been saved. So we just double click on that folder down there and that'll open the code for us. So that was the code we're just looking at, the logic. And to run it, we click this green arrow here. And you can see it says, thank you for paying your fees. Thank you for paying your fees. Please pay your fees. Please pay your fees. So what's happening there is we've set the fees paid to true. And this if works okay, and it says thank you for paying your fees. The other way of coding it works all right as well. So if you use this other way, That's worked fine, and we've got the printout here. And you can see if you use the if not, which is the preferred way, you get the response printed out. But if you do it the other way, you get your response anyway. So that's all a-okay. Now, where do I get back to my slideshow? Okay, I'll lose my spot in the slideshow. Okay, if statements are also quite significantly different to Visual Basic and to how you would have written them up in pseudocode perhaps. So here we've got something that we're defining the number, and we want that to be an integer. So we put int input, enter a positive or negative number. So print quotes there just prints a blank line to make it look neat. But we've got if the number is greater than 0. You'll notice there's no end ifs here in this code, and there's no else if. They use this word elif in Python instead. So that's a little bit different. And you have to put double dots, colons after each of these. So if num greater than 0, colon, that's telling Python that what comes next is part of the if statement, and it has to be indented with a tab. So you can't just space these and estimate them to look good like you might in Visual Basic. You're supposed to use a tab, so you have to press the tab key on your computer keyboard to get that tabbed in. And then you write an elif. So otherwise, if the number is exactly equal to 0, notice we're using the double equals because that's what Python likes, it'll say it's 0, not an integer, else it's going to print that it's a negative number. So that's kind of your if statement there, your selection statement. And down here, these two lines are outside of that if, because once the indentation stops and you're back to normal sort of in column 1 here, and there's no sort of indenting or anything, these are just normal sequence codes, sequence coding that will just get done in any case. So what will happen here is you enter a positive or negative number, you put in a 7, it'll tell you 7 is a positive number, and this line gets done anyway, these two lines at the bottom. If you put in a negative number like -5, it'll tell you that's the negative number, and these two lines will get done anyway in any case. I think we've got that one in Python room, but look, we won't look at it, we'll keep going. So some other quirks we found were with dividing values, and this might just be a Python room problem, but we wanted to do this dividing by 1,000 because we wanted to convert watts into kilowatts for this program we were doing. So to do that, you need to divide by 1,000. Now, divide by 1,000 did not work out for us at all, and instead we had to times by 0.001. So we were timesing by 1 on 1,000 basically, expressed as a decimal 0.001, and that all worked out fine for our program. But if we tried to code in /1000 and do it that way, what happened was that we set it up like this, but then further down in the program, this really weird kind of error happened when it tried to do some numerical calculations. And that was just like a red flag in Python where the program crashed. So yeah, dividing values seems to be a bit iffy. Now, we kind of looked into this, and in the Python room emulator, it has an issue if you're dividing two integer whole numbers that are less than 1. So 1/2 actually gives an answer of 0 in Python room, and you might be thinking, wow, that's pretty crazy because we all know 1/2 equals 0.5 as a decimal. And then when you've got that 0 answer later on, that'll cause problems, especially if you're trying to divide by that value, because if something divides by 0, it just crashes out in computer programs. So the thing is that Python will truncate, it chops off the answer to having no decimals. Because the thing started off as integers, it thinks, well, they don't want any decimals here, so if the answer comes out a decimal, it says, nope, they were using integers, we're not having decimals. And so something like 0.1 or 0.001, it just all gets set to 0 by Python. So you need to use float instead of integer, would help that out. Or the best solution we found was just timesing by the equivalent decimal value of the fraction. All right, now subroutines in Python are also a little different. Like in Visual Basic, if you did a Hello World program, you saw that we sort of have a private sub, then we put all our code in, then we have an end sub at the bottom of it. In Python, you just use the def statement, def, when you're going to define a subroutine. So here we've got a subroutine called sumo comparison that does some code. And everything that's pushed in, again, using the tab key, not just manual spaces here, everything that's pushed in underneath the def Python knows that's part of that subroutine. And down here we've got another subroutine, and everything that's pushed in with one push of the tab key here, Python knows that that's part of the subroutine. Now, in Visual Basic, we kind of put our subroutines just down the bottom of the program and have the main part of the module up the top of the program. But in Python, you've got to do it the other way around. So this is a little bit tricky. All of your main processing, your main processor goes right down the bottom of the program, okay? So down here we've got the main sort of modules we're doing, and we've got that sumo comparison one where it'll go off and do that little subroutine up there, the first def. We've got our AGL calculation, which will go off and do this other def. So it's kind of like Python has to kind of open up your program and read all the way down through it to know what all the subroutines are before you can actually call them. So the main processing has to go down the bottom of a Python program, and that's very important, or your program will crash and it will not work. So the other thing is global and local variables. So they're an important thing as well. If we've got some variable that we want two different subroutines to use, we need to specifically put a global in front of it. In Visual Basic, we could get away with it by putting them right up the top of our coding, and then anything that's up the top of the coding all on its own and it's not inside a subroutine, that just becomes global automatically. In Python, though, you've actually got to put the word global in front to tell Python that it is a global variable. Okay, so we could be down in a subroutine, we can define something as global. That means another subroutine will be able to use it. So we'll show you what we're talking about here. So here we're doing this thing called sumo calculation in this particular subroutine. And we come up with a value, a variable called float sumo cost in dollars. So this is how much your electricity costs with this Sumo power company here in Melbourne, Australia. But we want to use that sumo cost in dollars later on in a different subroutine. So we had to put global here. Now, once it's global, that means that when we get down to the sumo comparison, it will be able to find and know what sumo cost in dollars is, because that was defined as a global variable that all subroutines can use. Now, how can I explain this? Okay, I've got a pair of headphones here, all right? Now, these headphones, if I just put them out on the table here, I can just say to anyone in the room, hey, there's a set of headphones here, come and use them, feel free to use them, that's fine. These are global, they're available, everyone can have a go with them. But if I take these headphones, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, and I put them inside my pocket like this, that's like a local variable in a subroutine. So they're stored inside here, and it's only me that can take them out and actually use these headphones, all right? They're not available for everyone. I've put them in my little pocket here, my little subroutine, and only I'm allowed to use it in my subroutine, okay? So global things are available to everyone, and this is the way you actually define it in a program. Okay, on to the next thing. So here's some coding for you guys to try out. So here we're setting like a number equals 3, and if the number's bigger than 0, when Python does the checking, it's going to tell us, hey, that's a positive number. And because we didn't indent this part here, this part is just always going to be part of the output. And now we're just making a negative number. If the number's greater than 0, print its positive number. Well, no, it isn't greater than 0. Actually, it's a negative number. So what will happen here is this part of the code just won't get done, all right? But it will do this other part here, because this other part wasn't pushed across by using a tab key indent. So that's an important thing to know, and a source of common mistakes when you first start off with Python. All right, so you could go to Python Room actually and just try that program out. So everything we're doing here, you can try out in Python Room. It'll just get you good at practicing with Python code, and also help you kind of remember all these different structures that we've got in algorithms, the if-else selection algorithm. All right, so here's another example. Again, that's something you can try out in Python Room. We're not going to talk much about it really. That's just a basic if-else statement. Now remember, the else if is different in Python. So if we're going to check if a number is greater than 0 here, and that's a positive number, elif. So that means else if, or otherwise, if the number is exactly equal to 0, put 0. And if neither of those are true, it'll come down to here to this one. Otherwise, well, print out that it's a negative number, because if it's not positive, it's not 0. Well, then by the process of elimination, this last one, it has to be negative. Okay, so that's a little program you could try out in Python and actually check that it works okay. We can have our nested if-else. Okay, we can do nesting like we do in Visual Basic. It's just that you don't have any end ifs in there. That's all. It all works off the tab indentation. So these things are actually tabbed in twice here so that it's only part of this middle if statement and doesn't get done by anything else. So you can try that out. And you can also use ands as well. So here's another Python program. It might take you a while to type this in, but the idea of this one is they can type in 5 different marks they got on tests or assignments or something out of 10, and it'll work out the average for them. And then depending on the average, it's going to say whether it's an A+. So actually they'd need to be scores out of 100. These would need to be percentage scores that the person enters here. So you can use the AND statement here, just like we do in Visual Basic. So that's pretty much the same. It's just that you use elif instead of else if is the main difference, and there's no end ifs. This one's a big long one. It's kind of doing the same thing here. Might be a lot of work to type into Python, so probably don't bother doing that because you'll learn from the other ones that you have done. Now, the for loop. The for loop can be done in Python. That's another program structure we have. So for the count in the range 0 up to 5, so we're counting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're just going to print out about whether it's in the loop number or not. So this is a for loop. Let's just go have a look at that one because I think I've got that one in Python Room. So let's go across to Python Room and close off that one and have a look at for loop. We'll open up that one. Okay, so for the count in range. So for in range is how we set it up. It's not for next like Visual Basic. It's for in range when you're inside Python. And let's see what this should do. Okay, so let's give this a bit of a run. And you can see here it says I'm in loop number 0 and then 1, 2, 3, and 4, but it didn't get up to 5, okay? So here for in the range 0 to 5, print that out, okay? But it's only done up to 4. And the reason for that is that when it gets to 5, that's not inclusive here in the Python. Okay, now we've put a couple of programs here. We've got another one here. We've got a while loop this time. So while the words that we type in are not equal to the word by, it looks like it'll just keep repeating everything that's indented here. So let's try this one out. So we'll say something hello, and it just asks us to say something else. So we'll say, how are you? And it's the parrot program. It's just going to keep asking us to say stuff. Like we could ask, what is your name? And it'll keep going and going. So this while loop will just keep repeating until we say bye, because once we put in the word BYE, which we'll do in, remember it's case sensitive, so we better put in little letters. So once we put in the word by here, this won't be true. It's not equal to by anymore, so it's not going to do any of this. And so that part will stop. And then we got the numbers 1, 2, 3. Hey, where did they come from? Oh, that's from another loop we're using down here. So this is a while loop that outputs numbers. So we set the count equal to 1. And while that count stays less than 4, it's just going to print out what our count is and add 1 onto the count and then go back through the loop repeating again. So, okay, our count started off as 1, so it is less than 4, so we got 1 printed out, and then it did count plus equals 1, so it made the count into 2. Then it jumps back up to the top of the loop. So you don't use kind of while, end while like you would in Visual Basic here, just the indentation covers the ends. There's never any ends in Python. Now, so we're up to number 2. 2's less than 4, so it should print that out. So it prints out 2, adds 1 on, so 2 plus 1 is 3, comes back up to the top of the loop again. 3 will be less than 4, so that's good. It's good to go, and it does the count of 3, and then it puts the count up to 4 and goes back up the top. Now the count now is not less than 4 because we've actually got up to 4. So that's why it's stopped over the right-hand side here at 3. Okay, so that's just sort of some for loops and some while loops as well, all done in Python. Now, if you make an infinite loop while you're working on these by accident, which can happen, you can't actually kind of use Control-C or any control keys to stop it. You just have to wait for the web page to time out. So within about 30 seconds or 1 minute, Python Room will just time out, and then you're sort of okay to go and fix the problem in your program if you get those infinite loop things happening. All right, so that was a bit on while loops. So we did that by program with kind of the parrot talking and showed you that. And you could get into Python Room and try that one out yourself. And here we've got the do while loop. So remember, there is no do while, end while like Visual Basic would have for its coding. In Python, we're just setting up a while and using indentation. So that was that count loop that counted from 1 up to 3. So you're quite welcome to get into Python Room and try that one out as well. And this is just a repeat of what we already talked about when we did algorithms and pseudocode in Visual Basic with console programs. The while loop can be dangerous if you check at the bottom of it. So remember, it's always best to check first, just like diving in the water. Have while, counter less than 5 up the top. Don't have the checking down the bottom of the loop, and then you'll be A-okay. So we're checking the water first before we dive in. Don't have it down the bottom because that's like checking after the dive when you've already injured your spine and all those horrible things. Now, getting and processing user input in Python. So here's an example which shows we're just going to have a string variable where someone enters their name. So we'll ask them to enter their name. We'll ask them to enter their age in years. And we want that to be an integer value, a whole number. So in front of our input statement, we had to put int, the blue Python word, which will convert what they've typed in into an integer. And for what is half of 3? Well, half of 3 is 1.5. So they'll need to use decimals here. So we've set it up as float. So we've got a blue float there in Python language, which will convert what they type into a float number inside the computer. And so with the naming of these on the left-hand side here, our names, which are shown in white, we did use Hungarian and put strint and float onto those. And that's the code which should produce that. So if you try it out, that might be a little bit small to read. We'll see if we can zoom in on it. So Freddie is 17 years old. He doesn't get the answer correct though for half of 3. So he's under 18, he's not yet an adult. 1.25 was the wrong answer, and we tell the correct answer if they got it wrong. Passy there is 41 years old, and half of 3 in decimal notation. He's good at maths, Passy. He's taught maths before. 1.5, and we're all adults here is the response that you get, and you get told that you have got the right answer with an exclamation mark because he's a good boy. He knows his maths. All right. Task 1, adding up 3 numbers. So here are some Python tasks for you to do, like try and write some pseudocode to figure out what the logic is that's needed and then put it into Python. So we're just giving you a little starter there. That's how you would get the 3 numbers put out from the user and get them input as integer whole numbers. So that's one for you to do. We've got another one here for you to do. It's going to print out a list of the numbers from 0 to 20. So we've given you some pseudocode there. And as it's processing those numbers, if it's a single digit number, it should say it's a single digit one. And if it's a double digit, like when you get to 10, 11, 12, those ones that have 2 numbers in them, it should say double digit. So anyway, there's some logic, some pseudocode. And from that, it's then a matter of just translating that into Python language and getting it to work. Task 3 here, we've got a bus fares sort of business problem to solve for you here. So some pseudocode would help you before you jump in and do the Python. So if a passenger's less than 12, they're going to pay $30 for their big sightseeing trip around New York City, I think. And If they're $60 for the people between 12 and 65, so we're paying, you know, expensive tourist prices here for our bus trip, but you get a guide and maybe they give you some food to eat or something as well, or stop and you can get coffees for that price. That's what I'd be wanting. And the seniors, well, the seniors, they've paid all their taxes, so they get the big discount and they've only got $15 to pay for their bus tour. All right, so have a go at creating that solution in Python using Python Room. Here's one that's going to be a little bit harder. This one's to get the three numbers off the people, but we're not going to add them up this time. We're going to try and sort them out so they're in ascending order. So we've done a little bit of the coding here for you to help you out. So you can use this coding here to get the three different numbers off the person. And then our outputs are going to be, we're going to need the smallest number, the middle number, and the biggest number. So we're going to put those as outputs, but we need to determine what they are. So we're just going to set them up first equal to 0. And then we're going to start looking at how we can process it and figure it out to get those numbers in order. Okay, so check if the user entered 1, 2, or 3 is the smallest number. So which one of the ones that they entered up here? Is it number 1, 2, or 3, which is actually the smallest one? And then when we find out what that is, we can put that into our smallest number variable here, and that will be the first one we put out, the smallest one. So if their user number is less, the first number is less than the second number, and that first number is less than the third number, well, that first number's got to be the smallest one. So problem solved. There we go. Then we just do an elif. And we say, okay, is the second number they put in, is that smaller than the first one and smaller than the third one? Well, if it's smaller than both of them, that second number, that's got to be the littlest guy. And then otherwise, if it's not these two tests, well, then it must be the third number which they put in by the process of elimination. That's the smallest one. So int user number 3 would go into this variable here, which is going to be output. So the next check you do is try and check all three numbers and find out which one's the biggest one. And then you know who's the smallest and who's the biggest. And to find the middle one, you could either have some code, or maybe you could do it that, hey, I already know which one's the smallest and I already know which one's the biggest. So that other one that I haven't assigned anything to yet, that's got to be the middle one. All right, but anyway, that'll be a little bit challenging for you to do. And then, of course, there's the problem to think about. What if they put in two numbers the same, like 23, 23, and 5? Will your program work okay, or do you need to have some other modification to tell them, hey, we want three different numbers, and if they accidentally put in two the same, kind of stop the program and ask them to redo the input, perhaps with a while loop. But that's getting quite tricky and challenging, but see how you go with that one. Now, task 5, we're going to help you out with this because this one ended up being quite interesting. And this is the last of the tasks, and so this has been a long video, but we like to go through everything in detail to help people out. And then we've given you some work here to do as well. So if you do have the time, I know you don't have a lot of time, you're probably really busy, especially if you're a student or a teacher preparing a lot of lessons for students. Look, just do your best, but the more you do, you know, the better you get. Anyway, we had a look at this. We found this on a web page somewhere because we were looking for something about username and password, how we could do like a little program where they get 3 attempts to get it right. And we found this pseudocode, and this pseudocode at first we thought, hey, wow, that looks great, that looks perfect. Let's have a go at putting that into Python and checking it out. So when you get some pseudocode, Python is a great thing, Python Room, where you can quickly just pretty much translate that into Python and give it a go. But when we tried it out, we found out there are all these things wrong, okay? Because we'd said down in here in the while loop, if the username entered is not equal to their correct username, so this is the username we need from them to be valid. We need them to put in Bill Burr 123 and the password is summer 1965. Anything else will be invalid. But here you've got an and, so they have to get both of these things wrong. But what could happen is they could actually just get one of them wrong. So they might have Bill Burr 123, the user ID correct, but maybe they haven't got the correct password. So we actually needed to change this code. This code needs to be an OR here. So if this one's wrong or this one's wrong, well, then we're not letting them in. So that was one problem with the code. Another problem is with the counter, because the counter's set to 0 here. So the first time they're doing it, that's kind of counters 0, all right? And then we increment it up to 1 here. So they're actually getting, I think, an extra turn. I think they got 0, 1, 2, and 3, which is actually 4 attempts at doing the password, whereas they're really only supposed to have 3. So anyway, it needed some fixes, and here are the fixes that are needed. So this actual version works fine. So this one's good. So now we've got the while. The condition's a lot more different now, that if they get either of those two things wrong, okay, it's not going to let them through. And also we're doing our counting up here as well. And they haven't used up their 3 turns yet. So the int count is still at less than 3, all right? Then you can let them have a go at entering the username, entering the password, okay? Once they've used their 3 turns, and one of these two things has been wrong the whole time, well, then we'll go down to here, whoops, and do some checking. So if the username entered, if they got the right username and they've got the right password, well, then we know it finished because of that. And we say your user and password are correct. And if that's not the case, we know the login failed and we put access denied. All right, so this was kind of a little bit tricky to get it working. All right, so here we had to do, now what's going to happen if they get the password correct on the first go and they don't need 3 turns at it? Well, what will happen here is that this condition here, neither of these will be incorrect because they've got the correct password, so it'll stop doing the loop. So you don't have that problem. They could get it on the first go, the second go, or the third go, and they'll have the right credentials down the bottom of the program here, and it'll tell them they were successful. Otherwise, they had 3 goes and it's no good. They must be a hacker. Evil hackers, don't let them in. Access denied. All right, so the bibliography, just where we got some of this information from, programmiz.com had some good stuff on if and elif for Python, and the student average grade calculator, that actually came from a site, codescracker.com, so you can check out those sites if you want to look at some more Python things. And our 10 commandments there back near the beginning of the presentation, they were from the book by Adrian Jansen. So if you're here in Melbourne, Australia, doing software development as one of your VCE subjects, that's the textbook you're using, and these are all the things you need to know for VCE software development. So thanks very much for watching, and have fun programming with Python. I know it's a little bit different because if you already know Visual Basic and you're having a go at Python, you know, it'll start getting you all confused. But look, they are fairly similar. When I was in South America, you know, there were people that spoke Italian and they could understand what the people were saying in Spanish because it was fairly similar. So Python and Visual Basic are fairly similar like that. And you know, there's always going to be a need to know how to take your logic and your algorithm and your pseudocode and put it into at least 2 different languages. Typical example, mobile phone apps, you know, they have to do an iOS version of the app that's all done with iOS. And then the logic they want to do on the Android phones is exactly the same. They want the app to do exactly the same thing. So their algorithm pseudocode is all the same. But of course, they have to develop it in Android instead. Okay. So yeah, you'll have to get used to being able to kind of like speak multiple languages. All right. That's a reality of programming. But don't let that do your head in yet. If you're just a beginner, look, it's hard enough just learning your first language, just like learning foreign languages is. And then after you got your first one under control, you got a bit of experience and the other ones sort of start getting easier and easier. So please stick with it, don't give up, and have a go at trying out some Python in Python Room, and we'll see you in the next video. Subscribe to our channel and then you'll get an update of when our videos come out, which is usually once a week. Okay then, bye.